Jake had been dreaming about this Saturday morning for weeks. After working overtime at the construction company for 3 months straight, he finally had a free weekend. No deadlines, no phone calls, no meetings. Just him, his old fishing boat, and the beautiful lake that sat right behind his property. He owned 50 acres of pure Texas countryside, complete with rolling hills, old oak trees, and the crown jewel, a crystal-clear lake that stretched for nearly half a mile. His grandfather had bought this land back in the 1960s when it was just empty farmland. Now it was worth a fortune, especially with all the fancy neighborhoods popping up around the area. The morning air was crisp and cool as Jake backed his truck down toward the water. His boat wasn't anything special, just a 15-foot aluminum fishing boat he'd bought used 5 years ago. It had some scratches and the paint was fading, but it ran perfectly and got him where he needed to go. He'd spent the previous evening organizing his tackle box and checking his fishing gear. Today was going to be perfect. As he started unhooking the boat from his trailer, Jake noticed something unusual. Across the fence line that separated his property from the Willowbrook Heights community, several people were standing around watching him. It wasn't just casual watching either. They were pointing at his boat and talking among themselves in what looked like a heated discussion. Jake had lived here for 15 years, ever since he inherited the ranch from his grandfather. The Willowbrook Heights development had only been built about 5 years ago. It was one of those expensive gated communities with perfect lawns, identical houses, and an HOA that had rules for everything. Jake had heard stories from other neighbors about how strict they were, but since he didn't live there, he'd never paid much attention. He continued launching his boat, sliding it into the calm water. The lake was absolutely gorgeous this morning. The sun was just starting to peek over the hills, creating golden reflections on the water's surface. A few ducks were swimming near the far shore, and Jake could already see fish jumping in the distance. This was exactly what he needed after his stressful work schedule. Just as he was tying his boat to the small dock he'd built last summer, his cell phone rang. The number wasn't in his contacts, but it had a local area code, so he answered. "Hello? Is this Jake Mitchell?" The woman's voice was sharp and unfriendly. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Patricia Hendricks, president of the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. I'm calling about the boat you just put in the water." Jake looked out at his boat, then back toward the fence where the group of people was still watching him. "What about it?" "That boat is completely inappropriate for this area. It's an eyesore that's going to hurt our property values. You need to remove it immediately." Jake almost laughed. "Ma'am, I think you might be confused. This is my property and this is my lake. I'm not in your HOA. "I don't care whose property it technically is," Patricia snapped. "That rusty old boat can be seen from our community, and it violates our aesthetic standards. We've worked very hard to maintain the beauty and value of this area. Your aesthetic standards don't apply to my property," Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I have every right to use my own lake however I want. We'll see about that. I'm telling you right now to remove that boat or we'll take action." "What kind of action?" "Legal action. We have lawyers and we know how to use them. This community has standards and we won't let one selfish property owner ruin it for everyone else." Jake felt his temper starting to rise. He'd dealt with difficult customers at work, but this was different. This woman was trying to tell him what he could do on his own land his family had owned for decades before her fancy neighborhood even existed. "Let me make something clear," Jake said. "This is private property that's been in my family since 1963. Your community wasn't even a thought back then. I'm not removing anything, and I'm definitely not taking orders from someone who doesn't even live on my land." "Don't say I didn't warn you," Patricia said coldly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. We have connections and we have resources. That boat will be gone one way or another." The line went dead. Jake stared at his phone in disbelief. In all his years living here, nothing like this had ever happened. Sure, he'd had the occasional boundary dispute with neighbors over fence lines or tree branches, but those were always resolved with a friendly conversation. This felt different. This felt like a threat. He looked back toward the Willowbrook Heights fence. The group of people was still there, and now he could see a woman in the middle who appeared to be talking on her phone. That had to be Patricia. Even from this distance, he could tell she was angry by the way she was gesturing. Jake tried to shake off the strange encounter and focus on his fishing. He'd been looking forward to this morning for weeks, and he wasn't going to let some pushy HOA president ruin it. He climbed into his boat, started the small outboard motor, and puttered out toward the middle of the lake. The water was perfectly calm, and Jake felt his stress melting away as he cast his first line. This was his sanctuary, his piece of peace in an increasingly crazy world. His grandfather had taught him to fish on this very lake when he was just 6 years old. Some of his best childhood memories were made right here. As he sat there enjoying the morning quiet, Jake couldn't help but think about Patricia's phone call. What had she meant by connections and resources? And why was she so determined to control what happened on property that wasn't even hers? He'd heard rumors around town about the Willowbrook Heights HOA being particularly aggressive, but he'd never experienced it firsthand. One of his friends who lived in a different part of town had mentioned something about them pressuring people to sell their properties, but Jake had assumed it was just neighborhood gossip. Now he was starting to wonder if there was more to the story. The way Patricia had spoken to him wasn't just about aesthetics or property values. There was something else behind her anger, something that felt much more calculated and deliberate. Jake reeled in his line and cast it again, trying to focus on the peaceful morning. Whatever Patricia and her HOA were planning, he'd deal with it when the time came. For now, he just wanted to enjoy his lake and catch some fish. Little did he know that his peaceful Saturday morning was about to turn into something much bigger than a simple property dispute. Jake had been fishing for exactly 37 minutes when he heard the cars coming down his gravel driveway. The sound of tires on gravel was distinctive, and it was coming fast. He looked up from his fishing line to see not one, but 2 police cruisers making their way toward the lake. His first thought was that something had happened to one of his neighbors. Maybe there'd been an accident on the main road or someone needed help. Jake started reeling in his line, thinking he might need to assist with whatever emergency was happening. But as the police cars got closer, Jake realized they were heading straight for him. Both vehicles parked near his boat trailer, and 4 officers got out. Jake's stomach dropped. This couldn't be about his boat, could it? Officer Thompson, a tall man with graying hair, walked toward the dock while his partner, Officer Martinez, stayed by the cars. Thompson had been with the local sheriff's department for over 20 years, and Jake recognized him from around town. "Morning, Jake," Thompson called out as he approached the water's edge. "Sorry to bother you on your day off." Jake slowly motored his boat back toward the dock. "No problem, Officer Thompson."
What's going on?
"We got a call about some kind of property dispute. Something about illegal boat operation and trespassing." The caller seemed pretty upset. Jake tied his boat to the dock and climbed out. "Illegal boat operation? I'm fishing on my own lake." "That's what I figured," Thompson said with a slight smile. "But we have to follow up on all complaints. Can you show me your property deed and boat registration?" "Of course." Jake walked over to his truck and pulled out his wallet, then grabbed a folder from his glove compartment. He always kept his important documents handy, a habit his grandfather had taught him. "Here's the deed, and here's the boat registration." Thompson examined the papers carefully while Officer Martinez joined them. Martinez was younger, probably in his early 30s, and Jake had seen him around town but didn't know him personally. "Everything looks perfect," Thompson said, handing the documents back. "This is definitely your property, and your boat registration is current. Whoever called this in either doesn't understand property lines or is trying to cause trouble." "It was Patricia Hendricks from the Willowbrook Heights HOA," Jake said. "She called me about 30 minutes ago demanding I remove my boat. When I refused, she threatened legal action." Martinez shook his head. "Patricia Hendricks. We've had calls about her before." "Really?" Jake asked. Thompson nodded. "She's been involved in several disputes with property owners around here, always claiming people are violating some rule or another, even when they're on their own land." "Has she done this to other people?" Martinez looked at Thompson, who nodded slightly. "Jake, can I ask you something?" "Has anyone approached you about selling your property recently?" "No, why?" "Because there's been a pattern around here," Thompson explained. "Over the past couple years, we've responded to multiple complaints from the Willowbrook Heights HOA about various property owners around this lake. Noise complaints, zoning violations, aesthetic issues, you name it. And most of those complaints turned out to be either exaggerated or completely false," Martinez added. "But the harassment was enough that several property owners ended up selling their land and moving away." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "You think that's what this is about?" "I think you should be careful," Thompson said. The Hendricks family has been very interested in acquiring lakefront property. Patricia's husband owns a development company, and her brother-in-law is a real estate attorney. So this isn't really about my boat affecting their property values? Probably not, Martinez said. We've seen this playbook before. They file complaints, threaten lawsuits, make life difficult for property owners until people get fed up and sell. Jake looked out at his lake, then back toward the Willowbrook Heights fence line. The group of people was still there, watching the police encounter with obvious interest. What happened to the other property owners who sold? Most of them sold to companies connected to the Hendricks family, Thompson explained. Always for significantly less than market value, usually because the owners were tired of dealing with constant legal threats and harassment. That's terrible. It gets worse, Martinez said. We heard through the grapevine that they're trying to gain control of the entire lake area. Something about converting it into a private amenity for their HOA community. Jake's mind was racing. His peaceful morning had turned into something much more serious than he'd imagined. Is what they're doing legal? The complaints themselves aren't illegal if they believe them to be legitimate, Thompson explained. But the pattern of behavior is concerning. We can't prove they're deliberately harassing people to force sales, but the timing and frequency of complaints is suspicious. What should I do? Document everything, Martinez advised. Keep records of all phone calls, letters, any interactions with HOA members. If they escalate their complaints or threats, call us immediately. And don't let them intimidate you into doing anything you don't want to do, Thompson added. You have every right to use your property however you see fit, as long as you're following local laws and regulations. As the officers prepared to leave, Martinez turned back to Jake. By the way, there's something else you should know. The old Sunset Marina down at the south end of the lake is in financial trouble. The Sullivan family's place? That's right. Word is they might lose the property soon. The bank is talking about foreclosure. Jake had known the Sullivan family for years. Old Tom Sullivan had run that marina since Jake was a kid, and his son Danny had taken over the day-to-day operations recently. It was a small family-owned business that had been struggling since the economy took a downturn. That's awful. I had no idea things were that bad for them. The interesting thing is, Thompson said quietly, we heard that Patricia Hendricks has been asking a lot of questions about the marina property lately. Her husband's development company has been sniffing around, asking about zoning regulations and development potential. The pieces were starting to come together in Jake's mind. The aggressive complaints about his boat, the pattern of harassment against other lakefront property owners, and now the marina potentially going up for sale. It all seemed connected. Thanks for letting me know, Jake said. I really appreciate you guys coming out here and explaining what's been going on. Just be careful, Thompson warned as they walked back toward their cars. The Hendricks family has money and lawyers. They don't like it when people stand up to them. After the officers left, Jake sat on his dock and looked out at the lake. The peaceful morning he'd planned had turned into something much more complicated. He was no longer just a guy trying to fish on his own property. He was apparently standing in the way of someone's larger plan to control the entire lake area. Jake thought about his grandfather, who had worked 2 jobs to afford this land back in the 1960s. The old man had always said that land was the one thing they couldn't make more of, and that holding on to good property was worth any sacrifice. His grandfather had dreamed of passing this ranch down through generations of the family. Now some HOA president, with too much money and not enough respect for other people's rights, was trying to force him off his own land. The thought made Jake angry, but it also made him determined. He wasn't going to be bullied into selling his family's legacy. As he started his boat motor again and headed back out to continue fishing, Jake made a mental note to do some research when he got home. If Patricia Hendricks wanted to play games, he needed to understand exactly what kind of game they were playing. The morning sun was getting higher now, and the fish were starting to bite. But Jake's mind was no longer on fishing. He was thinking about property deeds, HOA bylaws, and what other surprises might be waiting for him in this unexpected battle for his family's land. That evening, Jake sat at his kitchen table with his laptop, a cup of coffee, and a legal pad. The peaceful fishing trip he'd planned had turned into something much bigger, and he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with. The police officer's warnings about Patricia Hendricks and her family's pattern of behavior had left him unsettled. He started with the basics, searching online for information about the Willowbrook Heights HOA and its leadership. What he found was eye-opening. Patricia Hendricks wasn't just any HOA president. She was married to Robert Hendricks, who owned Hendricks Development Corporation, one of the largest real estate development companies in the county. The more Jake dug, the more connections he discovered. Robert's brother, Michael Hendricks, was a real estate attorney who specialized in property acquisition and zoning law. Their sister, Carol Hendricks Watson, worked as a county planning commissioner. It was like looking at a family tree designed specifically for real estate manipulation. Jake pulled up the county clerk's website and started searching property records. He wanted to see if the officers were right about other lakefront property owners selling to companies connected to the Hendricks family. What he found made his stomach turn. In the past 2 years, 6 properties around the lake had been sold to various companies. On the surface, they looked like different buyers: Lakeside Holdings LLC, Waterfront Investments Inc., Crystal Lake Properties, and others. But when Jake dug deeper into the corporate filings, he found the same names appearing over and over again as officers and registered agents. Robert Hendricks, Michael Hendricks, and several other people who shared business addresses with Hendricks Development Corporation. The pattern was clear and disturbing. Each property sale had been preceded by multiple complaints filed with the county about code violations, noise issues, or environmental concerns. Jake found records of at least 30 formal complaints filed against these 6 properties in the months leading up to their sales. One case particularly caught his attention. A family named the Johnsons had owned a small lakefront cabin for over 40 years. According to the complaint records, they'd been cited for everything from excessive dock lighting to inappropriate watercraft storage to violation of waterfront setback requirements. The complaints had come from multiple sources, but when Jake cross-referenced the addresses of the complainants, most of them traced back to Willowbrook Heights residents. The Johnsons had sold their property 18 months ago to Lakeside Holdings LLC for $180,000. Jake looked up recent comparable sales in the area and found that lakefront properties were selling for $300,000 to $400,000. The Johnsons had been pressured into selling for roughly half of what their property was worth. Jake found similar stories for the other 5 properties. Each family had faced months of harassment through official complaints and legal threats. Each had eventually sold to one of the Hendricks-connected companies for significantly below market value. It was a systematic campaign of intimidation, disguised as community concern. The most disturbing discovery came when Jake found the HOA meeting minutes posted on the Willowbrook Heights website. In a meeting from 6 months ago, Patricia Hendricks had presented a community enhancement plan that included strategic property, acquisition to protect and enhance waterfront views, and community values. The plan specifically mentioned working with local authorities to ensure proper enforcement of zoning and aesthetic regulations in the surrounding area. It talked about creating a buffer zone of HOA-controlled properties to maintain the premium nature of our community investment. Jake realized he was looking at a deliberate strategy to take control of the entire lake area. The Hendricks family was using their money, legal connections, and political influence to systematically drive out longtime property owners and replace them with properties under their control. But there was more. Jake's research led him to discover that the Hendricks family had filed preliminary plans with the county for something called the Lake Vista Resort and Community Center. The plan showed a massive development that would include a private marina, restaurant, event center, and dozens of luxury condominiums, all built around the lake that included Jake's property and several others. The project was still in the early planning stages, but it required control of significant lakefront property to be viable. Jake could see why his 50-acre ranch with its prime lake access would be essential to their plans. He wasn't just a neighbor with an ugly boat. He was standing in the way of a multi-million-dollar development project. As Jake continued his research, his phone rang. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who lived on a smaller property about a mile down the road. "Jake, I heard the police were at your place today. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, just some nonsense from the HOA about my boat." "Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something? Have you had any problems with complaints or harassment from Willowbrook Heights?" There was a long pause. How did you know?
What happened?
It started about 3 months ago. First, it was complaints about my chickens being too noisy. Then they said my vegetable garden was an eyesore. Last week, someone reported me for having too many cars in my driveway when my grandchildren visited. Jake felt sick. Have they approached you about selling? A man came by last month. Said he represented investors who were interested in my property. Offered me $150,000, which is way less than it's worth. When I said no, he told me I might want to reconsider before my property issues got worse. Mrs. Chen, I think we're both being targeted. I found out they've done this to at least 6 other families. What do you mean? Jake explained what he'd discovered about the pattern of harassment and forced sales. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long time after he finished. Those poor families, she finally said. And here I thought I was just unlucky with complaining neighbors. We need to be careful. Document everything and don't let them pressure you into selling. After hanging up, Jake realized the situation was even bigger than he'd thought. It wasn't just about his property or even the lakefront properties. The Hendricks family was targeting anyone whose land could be useful for their development plans. Jake spent another hour researching the Sunset Marina situation that Officer Martinez had mentioned. What he found was heartbreaking. The Sullivan family had owned and operated the marina for 3 generations, but they'd fallen behind on their loan payments during the economic downturn. The bank was foreclosing, and the property was scheduled for auction in 3 weeks. The marina sat on 12 acres of prime lakefront property and included boat slips, a small store, a repair shop, and the family's home. It was exactly the kind of property that would be perfect for the Lake Vista Resort project. Jake found records showing that Hendricks Development Corporation had been in contact with the bank about the foreclosure proceedings. If the Hendricks family acquired the marina, they would control a significant portion of the lake's commercial waterfront. Combined with the residential properties they'd already acquired, they would have enough control to move forward with their development plans. Jake sat back in his chair and thought about what he'd learned. The Hendricks family had money, political connections, and a carefully planned strategy. They'd successfully driven out 6 families and were positioning themselves to acquire the marina. His little boat controversy was just the beginning of what was likely to be a much more serious campaign to force him off his land. But Jake also realized something else. The Hendricks family's plan had a weakness. They needed his property to make their development work, but they also needed the marina. If someone else acquired the marina first, it would disrupt their entire strategy. Jake looked at his grandfather's photo on the mantelpiece. The old man had always said that sometimes the best defense was a good offense. Maybe it was time to stop just defending his property and start taking some action of his own. He opened a new browser tab and started researching commercial property loans and real estate investment strategies. If Patricia Hendricks wanted to play games with his family's land, perhaps it was time to show her that 2 could play that game. Jake barely slept that night. His mind kept racing through everything he discovered about the Hendricks family's systematic takeover of lakefront properties. By 5 in the morning, he'd made his decision. Instead of waiting around to be their next victim, he was going to beat them at their own game. His first call was to his attorney, David Walsh, who had handled his grandfather's estate and various business matters over the years. David was surprised to hear from Jake so early on a Sunday morning, but he agreed to meet at his office after Jake explained the urgency of the situation. "This is quite a story," David said after Jake had laid out everything he'd discovered. "The Hendricks family has been aggressive in their business practices, but this sounds like it crosses some legal lines. Can they actually force people to sell their property this way?" "Not legally, no. But harassment campaigns can be effective if people don't know their rights or can't afford to fight back. The fact that they're using official complaints and legal threats makes it harder to prove, but the pattern you've documented is concerning. What about the marina? Is there anything we can do to help the Sullivan family?" David leaned back in his chair. "The foreclosure is a matter of public record. Anyone can bid at the auction, as long as they have proof of funds and meet the bank's requirements. How much would it take?" According to the foreclosure documents, the outstanding loan balance is $1.8 million. But at auction, it could go higher if there are multiple bidders. Jake had been thinking about this all night. He'd inherited not just his grandfather's land, but also his life insurance money and savings. Plus, Jake had been living simply and saving most of his construction company income for years. He had enough money to make a serious bid for the marina. David, I want to buy that marina. That's a big financial commitment, Jake. Are you sure you want to get involved in this fight? They're already targeting my property. At least this way, I'm taking action instead of just waiting for them to make their next move. David nodded slowly. If you're serious about this, we need to move fast. The auction is in 3 weeks, but we should talk to the Sullivan family first. Sometimes these situations can be resolved before the auction if the right offer comes along. By 10 o'clock that morning, Jake and David were driving toward Sunset Marina. Jake had been there many times over the years to buy bait and fuel for his boat, but he'd never really looked at it as a business investment. Now he was seeing it with different eyes. The marina was larger than he'd remembered. Along with the main building that housed the store and office, there were 48 boat slips, a boat launch ramp, a repair shop, and a small restaurant that the Sullivans had closed during the slow season. The property also included a modest house where Tom Sullivan and his wife lived, plus several outbuildings for storage and equipment. They found Tom Sullivan in the marina office, looking over paperwork with a defeated expression. Tom was in his 70s, a weathered man who'd spent his entire life working on the water. His son Danny was there too, looking just as discouraged as his father. "Jake, good to see you," Tom said, trying to force a smile, "though I'm afraid we might not be here much longer." "That's actually why I'm here, Tom. David and I would like to talk to you about the foreclosure situation." Tom's expression became guarded. "If you're here to make a lowball offer like everyone else, you can save your breath." "Actually, I'm here to make you an offer that might surprise you," Jake said. "I want to buy the marina, but I also want to offer you and Danny jobs running it." Tom stared at him. "What?" Jake explained his proposal. He would purchase the marina for enough money to pay off the bank loan and give the Sullivan family a significant amount left over for their retirement. In exchange, Tom and Danny would stay on as managers, with full benefits and job security. They would continue to live in the house and run the day-to-day operations just as they always had. "You're talking about a lot of money," Danny said. "Why would you want to do this?" Jake told them about the Hendricks family's development plans and their systematic campaign to acquire lakefront properties. If they get control of this marina, they'll have everything they need to push through their resort project. That means more pressure on all the remaining property owners, including me. "So you're buying the marina to protect your own property?" "Partly, yes, but also because what they're doing to families like yours is wrong. You've been here for 40 years, Tom. This marina is part of the community. It shouldn't be turned into some exclusive resort amenity." Tom and Danny exchanged glances. "What exactly are you offering?" David pulled out the documents he'd prepared. "Jake is prepared to pay $2.3 million for the complete purchase, enough to pay off the $1.8 million loan and leave you with $500,000 clear profit. You would both receive employment contracts as marina managers, with salaries, benefits, and the right to continue living in the house." "You're serious about this?" Tom asked. "Completely serious. I can have the money transferred by tomorrow if you agree to the terms." Tom was quiet for a long time, looking out at the lake where he'd spent most of his life. "Jake, I've got to ask, do you have any experience running a marina?" "No, but you do. That's why I want you to stay and run it. I'm not looking to change how things operate here. I just want to keep it out of the wrong hands." Danny leaned forward. "What happens if you decide you don't want the marina anymore? Or if something happens to you?" "The contract will include provisions for that," David explained. "Right of first refusal if Jake ever decides to sell, job security guarantees, things like that." Tom stood up and walked to the window. Jake could see him thinking, weighing his options. Finally, he turned back around. "The Hendricks people came by here last week, offered to buy out the foreclosure for exactly what we owe the bank. Not a penny more. Said it was generous considering our situation." "That's their standard approach," Jake said. "Pressure people when they're vulnerable, then offer just enough to solve the immediate problem. When they left, Patricia Hendricks told me I should be grateful for their offer. Said property around here was going to become more regulated soon, and it might be harder for a small family business to meet the new requirements." Jake felt his anger rising. "She was threatening you." "That's what it felt like. We've never had problems with regulations before, but suddenly the county inspector showed up 3 times last month, found violations we've never been cited for in 40 years of operation." "Will you accept Jake's offer?" David asked. Tom looked at his son, who nodded. Yes, we will. And thank you, Jake. You're saving more than just our business, you're saving our home. The next few hours were a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls, and legal procedures. David contacted the bank to arrange for the loan payoff, while Jake worked with his financial advisor to arrange the wire transfer. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, all the paperwork was signed and the money was in motion. The bank confirmed that they would accept the early payoff, which would stop the foreclosure proceedings immediately. Tom and Danny Sullivan would keep their home and their jobs, plus have enough money for a comfortable retirement when they were ready. As they were finishing up the paperwork, Tom pulled Jake aside. "Can I ask you something? This is a lot of money for you, isn't it?" "It's most of what I have saved, yes. Why risk it all for people you barely know?" Jake thought about his grandfather, about the other families who had been pressured into selling their properties, about Mrs. Chen and her worry about losing her home. Because some things are more important than money, Tom, and because bullies shouldn't be allowed to win. That evening, as Jake sat on his dock looking out at the lake, his phone rang. It was Patricia Hendricks, and she sounded furious. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "I'm not sure what you mean. Don't play games with me. I know you bought that marina today. I invested in a local business. Is there a problem with that? You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. That marina property is part of a larger development plan that will benefit the entire community." "Your development plan? You mean, this isn't over, Jake. You can't stop progress, and you can't stop us." "Maybe not," Jake said calmly, "but I can make it a lot more expensive for you." The line went dead. Jake smiled as he put his phone away. For the first time since this whole mess started, he felt like he was in control of the situation. Patricia Hendricks had spent months planning her family's takeover of the lake area, but she hadn't counted on someone fighting back tomorrow. Jake would start learning everything he needed to know about running a marina. But tonight he was going to sit by his lake on his property, with his boat tied to his dock, and enjoy the peace and quiet. The Hendricks family wanted a fight. They were about to get one. The news of Jake's marina purchase spread through the community faster than he'd expected. By Monday morning, his phone was ringing constantly. Some callers were supportive neighbors congratulating him on standing up to the Hendricks family. Others were clearly upset about his interference with their plans. The most interesting call came from Officer Thompson. "Jake, I wanted to give you a heads up. We've gotten 3 separate complaints about your marina already this morning." "What kind of complaints?" "Noise violations, environmental concerns, improper boat storage." "The usual stuff." "All from Willowbrook Heights residents." Jake wasn't surprised. "Let me guess, they want you to shut us down?" "They want us to investigate, which we will. But between you and me, I think you should expect this to escalate. The Hendricks family doesn't like to lose." Jake spent his first day as a marina owner learning the business from Tom and Danny Sullivan. The operation was more complex than he'd realized, with boat slip rentals, fuel sales, maintenance services, and dozens of regulations to follow. But it was also more profitable than he'd expected when properly managed. "We've been struggling because we couldn't afford to upgrade the facilities," Tom explained as they walked around the property. "The Hendricks people knew that, which is why they thought they could wait us out." "What kind of upgrades?" "New docks, better electrical service, updated fuel systems. This place could easily handle twice as many boats with the right improvements." Jake made mental notes as they toured the facilities. If he was going to own a marina, he might as well make it the best marina on the lake. That afternoon, a county inspector showed up unannounced. Jake watched as the man spent 3 hours going over every inch of the property with a clipboard and camera. Tom followed him around, answering questions and providing documentation for everything. "Find any problems?" Jake asked when the inspection was finished. "A few minor items," the inspector said. "Nothing that can't be fixed quickly. I have to say I'm surprised. Based on the complaints we received, I expected to find major violations." "What were the complaints about specifically?" The inspector checked his notes. "Improper fuel storage, unsafe electrical systems, unpermitted dock extensions, environmental contamination." "But everything looks fine to me." After the inspector left, Tom shook his head. 40 years we've been here, and suddenly we're a safety hazard. This is exactly what happened to the other families. The difference is we're not going anywhere," Jake said. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake threw himself into improving the marina. He hired electricians to upgrade the power systems, contracted with a dock builder to expand the boat slips, and brought in environmental specialists to ensure everything met the highest standards. Whatever complaints the Hendricks family wanted to file, Jake was going to make sure they had no basis in reality. The transformation was remarkable. Word spread among the boating community that Sunset Marina was under new management and upgrading its facilities. Boat slip reservations started pouring in, and Danny had to hire 2 additional employees to handle the increased business. "I haven't seen this place this busy in years," Tom told Jake as they watched a steady stream of boats coming and going. "You've brought this marina back to life." But Jake's real victory came on a Friday afternoon, when Patricia Hendricks herself showed up at the marina office. She marched in like she owned the place, her expensive shoes clicking on the wooden floor. "I want to speak with Jake Mitchell," she announced to Danny, who was working behind the counter. "I'm Jake," Jake said, emerging from the back office. "What can I do for you?" "You can stop this ridiculous charade and sell me this property. The marina isn't for sale. Everything is for sale for the right price. I'm prepared to offer you $3 million. Jake almost laughed. She was offering him more than he'd paid, but that wasn't the point. "Like I said, it's not for sale." Patricia's composure cracked slightly. "Do you have any idea what you're interfering with? This marina property is essential for a development project that will bring jobs and tax revenue to this entire area." "You mean it's essential for your family's plan to make money off public lake access? That's not what this is about, really, because I've seen your preliminary development plans. Lake Vista Resort and Community Center, very ambitious project. Must be frustrating to have your timeline disrupted." Patricia stared at him. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know that your family has been systematically harassing lakefront property owners to force them to sell below market value. I know that you've used your political connections to file bogus complaints and create legal problems for families who've lived here for decades. And I know that your whole plan depended on controlling this marina. You can't prove any of that. Maybe not in court. But I don't need to prove it. I just need to own this marina and keep it out of your hands." Patricia looked around the busy marina, at the new docks and upgraded facilities, at the customers coming and going. Jake could see her calculating how much her plans had been disrupted. "This isn't over," she said finally. "Yes, it is," Jake replied calmly. "Your family had a plan that depended on secrecy and intimidation. Now everyone knows what you've been doing. The other property owners are organizing to document your harassment campaigns. The police are watching for more bogus complaints. And most importantly, you don't have control of the marina anymore. We have other options, such as, we could build our development on the properties we already control, without marina access, without the waterfront centerpiece. Good luck getting investors for a lakefront resort that doesn't actually have lake access." Patricia's face was red with anger. "You think you're very clever, don't you? I think I'm a guy who wanted to fish on his own lake without being harassed by his neighbors. Everything else just followed from that." After Patricia left, Jake sat in the marina office and reflected on how much his life had changed in just 3 weeks. He'd gone from being a construction worker who wanted a peaceful Saturday morning of fishing to being the owner of a thriving marina business. His phone rang. It was Mrs. Chen. "Jake, you won't believe what happened. A man from Hendricks Development came by today and offered me $300,000 for my property. That's twice what they offered before. Did you take it?" "Of course not. But it's interesting that they suddenly think my land is worth more, isn't it?" Jake smiled. "Very interesting." Over the following months, Jake's Marina became the social center of the lake community. The new restaurant that Danny opened was popular with both boaters and local residents. The boat slip waiting list grew longer every week. Jake even started a small boat rental business for people who wanted to enjoy the lake without owning their own boats. The Hendricks family made a few more attempts to disrupt his business through complaints and inspections, but they found nothing wrong. Jake had made sure the marina exceeded every safety and environmental standard. Eventually, even they seemed to give up. One evening, as Jake sat on his dock watching the sunset, Tom Sullivan joined him. "You know, Jake, I've been thinking about what you did for us. You don't need to thank me again, Tom. It's not about thanking you. It's about understanding what really happened here. You didn't just buy a marina. You saved this whole community from being taken over by people who don't care about anything but profit." Jake looked out at the lake, where several boats were enjoying the evening calm. Families were fishing, Kids were swimming near the Marina beach and everything felt peaceful and right. My grandfather always said this lake belonged to everyone who respected it, Jake said. I just made sure it stayed that way. Think you'll ever regret spending all that money? Jake thought about Patricia Hendricks's angry face, about the Sullivan family's relief and gratitude, about the thriving business that had brought life back to the lake community. He thought about his grandfather's photo on his mantelpiece and the values the old man had tried to teach him. No, he said finally, I don't think I'll ever regret it. As darkness fell over the lake, Jake could see lights coming on in houses around the shoreline. Some of those houses belonged to the families who had been pressured into selling to the Hendricks companies. Others belonged to longtime residents like Mrs. Chen who had been able to stay because they were no longer facing harassment and legal threats. The marina itself was quiet now, but Jake could see boats tied up at the slips, waiting for their owners to return for another day on the water. Tomorrow there would be fishing trips and family outings and peaceful mornings just like the one Jake had been trying to enjoy. When this whole adventure started, he'd learned something important over the past few months. Sometimes standing up to bullies requires more than just refusing to be intimidated. Sometimes it requires taking action, making sacrifices, and fighting back in ways the bullies don't expect. Jake's fishing boat was still tied to his dock, ready for those peaceful Saturday mornings he'd been dreaming about. But now he also owned a marina, employed a half-dozen people, and had helped preserve a way of life that the Hendricks family had tried to destroy. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to go fishing.